After 1945, the world was violently split in two by an ideological Iron Curtain. But the United States didn't just build a bigger military to fight the looming Cold War. Instead, they quietly turned their own currency into a weapon far stronger than any atomic bomb. To understand this global dominance, we have to rewind slightly to 1944. Before the war even ended, delegates from 44 allied nations gathered quietly in the mountains of Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. At this time, Europe and Asia were in absolute ruins, their economies completely devastated by relentless fighting. America, however, was totally untouched and strategically held the vast majority of the world's physical gold reserves. At this historic conference, they officially established a brand new U.S.-led global financial order. Desperate for stability, other nations agreed to peg their national currencies directly to the U.S. dollar. And to guarantee value, the U.S. dollar itself was strictly pegged to physical gold at exactly $35 an ounce. This brilliant system made the American currency essentially as good as gold, providing desperate global stability. To manage this, they created powerful new international institutions like the World Bank and the IMF. Almost overnight, the United States became the undisputed, incredibly powerful central banker of the entire free world. The almighty dollar flowed across oceans, tightly locking allied countries into an American-led economic system. The ultimate economic trap was set. But just across the Iron Curtain, a massive red bear was waking up. In 1946, Winston Churchill famously declared that an Iron Curtain had descended across Europe. This wasn't just a political divide. It was the ultimate battleground between capitalism and communism. The United States quickly realized that communism thrived in places destroyed by poverty and despair. And after the horrors of World War II, Western Europe was exactly that, starving and completely devastated. To stop the red spread, America launched one of the most brilliant economic strategies ever, the Marshall Plan. They pumped over $13 billion, a massive fortune, directly into rebuilding the shattered European nations. Fleets of cargo ships crossed the Atlantic, bringing food, machinery, and investments to their desperate allies. Almost like magic, Western European factories reignited, and their economies experienced a miraculous, rapid recovery. But this generosity came with a catch. It tied these rebuilt economies permanently to the U.S. dollar. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union fiercely rejected this money, forcing its Eastern Bloc allies to do the exact same. Stalin tightened his iron grip, completely cutting off West Berlin from the prosperous, recovering West. In response, American and British planes flew around the clock, dropping life-saving supplies during the incredible Berlin airlift. This economic warfare solidified the borders. The world was now permanently locked into a tense, high-stakes standoff. The United States had successfully weaponized its immense wealth to contain the Soviet threat without firing a single bullet. However, this delicate economic balance of power was about to be pushed to the absolute edge of nuclear annihilation. Since fighting directly would guarantee mutual destruction, the superpowers engaged in devastating global proxy wars. Instead of a single battlefield, deadly conflicts violently erupted in places like Korea and Vietnam. The U.S. and the Soviet Union treated the entire global map like a giant, high-stakes chessboard. They heavily funded opposing sides, turning local civil wars into massive, devastating international tragedies. Meanwhile, the terrifying nuclear arms race spiraled completely out of control behind the scenes. Both sides quickly built enough weapons to destroy the entire world several times over. This terrifying military strategy was known as mutually assured destruction, or quite simply, MAD. In 1962, this horrifying theory was put to the ultimate test during the Cuban Missile Crisis. American spy planes discovered that the Soviets were secretly installing nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles from U.S. soil. President Kennedy ordered a strict naval blockade of the island. For 13 agonizing days, the entire world collectively held its breath in pure terror. The human race was literally just one single miscalculation away from absolute nuclear annihilation. At the very last second, a secret deal was struck. and the Soviet ships finally turned around. The world survived, but the psychological trauma permanently scarred a whole generation. Realizing the Earth was too fragile a battlefield, the superpowers turned their intense rivalry toward the stars. While the threat of nuclear war kept the world frozen in fear, a completely new and exciting battleground suddenly opened up above them. In October 1957, the Soviet Union shocked the entire globe by successfully launching Sputnik, the very first artificial satellite. The small, shiny metal sphere emitting a continuous beep sound proved that Soviet rocket technology was far ahead of the Americans. This terrifying realization sparked absolute panic across the United States, famously known as the Sputnik shock. In a frantic rush to catch up, the U.S. government drastically overhauled its education system and officially created NASA. But the Soviets struck another massive blow in 1961, sending Yuri Gagarin to become the first human being in space. Refusing to be humiliated again, President John F. Kennedy made a bold, historic promise to the American people. He boldly declared that the United States would successfully land a man on the moon before the decade was out. To achieve this seemingly impossible dream, America unleashed the full, terrifying financial power of the almighty U.S. dollar once again. They poured billions of dollars into massive research facilities, mobilizing hundreds of thousands of scientists, engineers, and pilots. The climax of this astronomical investment arrived in July 1969 with the legendary Apollo 11 mission. After a perilous journey, the lunar module successfully touched down on the dusty, cratered surface of the moon. American astronauts proudly planted the stars and stripes into the lunar soil, leaving a permanent mark on history. This monumental achievement was broadcast live to millions, proving American technological and economic supremacy to the entire world. The United States had decisively won the space race, dealing a massive psychological and financial blow to the Soviet Union. By the 1970s, the massive financial cost of the Cold War and the space race was finally catching up with America. Other nations began demanding physical gold in exchange for their dollars, rapidly draining the American reserves. In 1971, President Richard Nixon made a shocking announcement that completely shattered the entire Bretton Woods system. He officially severed the dollar's direct link to gold, effectively transforming it into a pure fiat currency. But America quickly found a brilliant new way to keep its currency absolutely dominant: the petrodollar system. They struck a strategic deal with major oil-producing nations, ensuring that global oil was purchased using U.S. dollars. This instantly forced every country on Earth to stockpile American currency, cementing its ultimate global power. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union was struggling to keep up with this terrifying economic and technological pace. Their rigid, state-controlled economy was stagnating, completely burdened by massive military spending and widespread inefficiency. In the 1980s, the U.S. announced the Star Wars missile defense program, a high-tech bluff that terrified Soviet leaders. Desperately trying to match this science fiction technology completely bankrupted the already fragile Soviet system. The symbolic breaking point arrived in 1989, when the infamous Berlin Wall was finally torn down by joyful crowds. Shortly after, in 1991, the Soviet Union officially collapsed and dissolved into 15 separate republics. The nearly 5-decade-long Cold War was over, and the United States emerged as the sole, undisputed superpower. America had won the ideological war, not just with weapons, but by wielding the unmatched power of its economy. With the Soviet Union gone, the United States stood alone as the world's sole, undisputed superpower. The global economy was now entirely shaped by American markets and completely dominated by the U.S. dollar. Wall Street quickly became the financial beating heart of the planet, generating unprecedented, unimaginable wealth. America enjoyed the exorbitant privilege of printing the currency that the entire world needed to survive. But wielding such absolute financial power over decades eventually began to create deep, growing resentments. The U.S. frequently used the dollar to strictly sanction and financially isolate opposing nations completely. At the same time, the American national debt skyrocketed to astronomical levels, creating global anxiety. Today, a massive geopolitical shift is underway. Major developing economies are actively pushing for de-dollarization. Nations are desperately trying to trade in their own local currencies or hoard physical gold instead. If the world eventually abandons the dollar, the very foundation of the American economic empire could violently crack. The invincible weapon that completely won the Cold War might slowly be losing its sharpest edge. The giant must now navigate a rapidly changing, highly competitive, multipolar world, where it is no longer totally alone. Can the United States successfully maintain its absolute global dominance? Or is the era of the almighty dollar finally coming to an end? What do you think the future holds? Subscribe to Gold Era History and join us for the final episode exploring America's modern cracks. Remember, history always has many different angles. Check the description for our sources, and see you next time.